Hey everyone, this is Sumerlin, and I'm here to talk to you about Dante and the Inferno. Well, to start with, Dante Alighieri was born in Florence, Italy. Now, typically we refer to authors by their last name, but Dante is so famous, he's first name one word famous. So you can go ahead and just call him Dante. If you don't know where Florence is, well, it's in Italy. Italy's at the bottom of Europe. There we go. Now, he's writing in the Middle Ages. So this is important. This is a major complex text from a long, long time ago. It's actually the first in a trilogy of texts that comprise the Divine Comedy. This is the whole work. Do we notice how that's in italics? That's because that's how you punctuate a title. Anyway, the other works in this are the Purgatory and the Paradise. We read the Inferno because honestly, reading about hell is way more fun than reading about these other things. Now, comedy in Dante's time doesn't really mean funny. It describes a story where the ending is positive or upbeat or uplifting. Shakespeare does the same thing. This is the tradition. If it's a tragedy, everybody dies at the end. If it's a comedy, everybody lives at the end. Please remember that when we get to Shakespeare. Now, a little bit of background. Rome controls Florence at this point in time. So Rome is this major population. It's the home of the Catholic Church. There is a conflict between the church and the government, but more importantly, there is a conflict in the middle class, this merchant class called the Guelphs. I am probably not saying that correctly. The Guelphs broke into these two groups called the Whites and the Blacks, and those were their colors. They would wear white if you were part of the white group, and you wear blacks if you were part of the black group. So Dante was a member of the Whites, but the Pope at the time, Pope Boniface VIII, was a member of the other side, the blacks. And since he was the one in charge, he had the power to exile and excommunicate many individuals, which he did to Dante. So this is why Dante is kicked out of Florence. Now, this really upsets Dante a lot. This is his home. He is enraged by this abuse of power as he sees it. So this is one of the motivating factors for him writing the Divine Comedy. Now, Dante does have a wife and 4 kids, but they do not join him in exile. Instead, he loves a woman named Beatrice. Now, he never knows Beatrice. He's never met Beatrice. He's only ever seen her twice. This seems very weird to us, but at that point in time, there was a tradition that called courtly love. And with courtly love, you didn't actually love that other person. You loved the idea of that person. So he saw Beatrice and thought she was beautiful and wonderful, and he held her up as this ideal of a perfect woman. Well, it's easy to be the perfect woman when you don't have to speak or live with that person from day to day or any of those things. So that's the idea of courtly love. Now, when she died at the age of 24, Dante becomes incredibly depressed, and he transforms her within his works to become the symbol of God's love. She is his angel. She is his muse. She is everything beautiful and great and wonderful in the world. Now, as Dante is traveling through hell, he needs a guide, and this is going to be Virgil. Virgil is an ancient Italian. He is already dead by the time Dante writes this because, duh, he needs somebody who is in hell to guide him through hell, and you've got to be dead to be in hell, hence going with Virgil. Virgil's picked because he is an incredibly famous Italian poet. So Dante, being Italian, wants to be led by a famous Italian. That's why he hooks up here with Virgil. Virgil also represents reason and logic, because the only way that you can really get to know yourself and know your sins is by truly understanding them with reason and logic. Now, the Divine Comedy is written in Italian, in vernacular here, which is just common talk, common speech. Why this matters is because if you were anyone famous at that point in time, if you were anyone who was learned, you would write in Latin. Latin was the aristocratic language of the day. But Dante wants to write in Italian so that everyone can read his book, because everyone deserves a chance to get to heaven. So it becomes incredibly popular because everyone can read it. It's written in the base language. It's written in Italian. Dante also believes in the separation of church and state, which sort of sounds familiar. He believed that you had to be they had to be together to make a perfect person, but that it was the church's job to look after your soul and the government's job to look after your physical body, and that they should not intermix. One had one role, one had the other. This is probably coming from his argument with the Pope and the Pope's abuse of power. If you are a world history buff, you know that Catholicism before the Reformation is is a little corrupt. So Dante's dealing with that here. Um, the Trinity is another major component within all of Dante's texts. There are three books: the Inferno, the Paradiso, the Purgatorio. There are 9 circles of hell. 9 is, important with 3. There's the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. There are 33 cantos within each of his books. 3 is a big thing, so he's going to play with that number a lot, including in not inventing really, but perfecting what we call terzerima. Terzerima is a rhyme form, literally meaning third rhyme, that interlocks. So let me show you an example of that. Don't make fun of my poem. Okay? I love to stay in bed where everything is nice, with a pillow for my head. Sleeping is my vice. I could snooze all day. Exercise, no dice. If I had my way, I'd teach with my blankie, but no one wants my say. This is terzerima because you have this rhyme, A, B, A, and the middle one links to the next, B, C, B. So the middle one links to the next, C, D, C. So the next one would be D, E, D. This is very hard to do in English because we're not a Romance language. We're not a Latin-based language. Latin-based languages like French and Spanish and Italian, a lot of their words end in vowels like A's and O's. So it's easy to do terzerima in Italian or Spanish. It's very hard to do in English. You come off sounding like a first grader trying to write a poem. It's very hard to do this in English. Now, why is Dante writing this? Well, one of the reasons he wants to do this is because Italian literature has this tradition of the Odyssey, the Iliad, the Aeneid, these great big works of literature, but those are all pagan. They're all with Zeus and Hera and Mars and all of those people. Dante wants to write an epic from a Christian perspective because he wants to bring people to God. So that is the important element to there. He wants to write a Christian epic to bring his country into what he sees as the right path, the modern path. He's also trying to justify the ways of God to man. He wants to explain, like the heavenly order. He wants to help bring the Catholic Church and the Roman Empire together by telling them what they should be doing. He wants to also lecture Florence on its corruption. Remember, because he's angry. He's angry at what has happened. He's angry at that schism between the classes. If you don't know what schism means, you should look it up. He also really wants to provide a guidebook to the proper path to salvation, how to get to heaven. Now, you get to heaven by going through hell, by learning about your sin. You got to recognize your sin. You go through purgatory by repenting. And then you finally get to the paradise where you receive grace. Now, what is our purpose in reading this? Because we're not going to spend a long time on Dante, but we are focusing on some important elements. Well, the archetype of the journey is a very old one. You've got the Odyssey, you've got the Aeneid, which I've told you about up there. you're going to see ideas of a journey over and over and over again. And although Dante is not the first person, because the Odyssey is much older than Dante, Dante's not the first, but his has become the most famous. And I think it's famous probably because it's so juicy. You want to read about hell. It's so interesting. So not the first, but the most famous. We're also reading it because there is a Heart of Darkness connection. Heart of Darkness is about a man journeying into darkness. He is going into the heart of darkness. Gee, that sounds like a guy going into hell, doesn't it? It should. It's about a man journeying into darkness to face himself. That sounds a lot like Dante's Inferno. So I need you to know some things about the Inferno so you can know some things about Heart of Darkness. Now, how does the story work? Well, the text is written in cantos, and cantos are kind of like chapters because this is an epic poem. It is an epic poem. It is not a book. It's also written as an allegory. And we've talked a little bit about allegories, the allegory of the cave. So just to remind you, an allegory has a metaphorical meaning and a literal meaning. I refer to it as the duh meaning and the smarty pants meaning. So there are some hidden allegories along the way. For one of them, Dante is wandering in the woods at the midpoint of his life. And then he has a midlife spiritual crisis. So he is lost in the woods and doesn't know where to go. Literally. Metaphorically, he's lost in his life and he doesn't know how to get back on that quote-unquote right path to righteousness. That's the literal level. He's lost in the woods. The metaphorical level, he's trying to get to that right path of righteousness. He's lost spiritually. There, he's stopped by the leopard, the wolf, and the lion. So literally, these three monsters jump out of nowhere and stop him from going any further along the path. Metaphorically, they represent the sins that are keeping him from righteousness. So the leopard is the sins of the fraud, like lying and cheating and stealing. The wolf is the sins of lust, like desire. And the lion is the sins of pride. So if these three things are stopping Dante from continuing along his path, then metaphorically these three sins are stopping Dante from God's grace. There's a part where the Gorgon Medusa is turning people into stone. So they are literally being turned into stone, but they're also being turned into stone metaphorically, that they're stuck in their sin. They can't go any further. They're going to be frozen. They can't get past what they're doing. Now there's a section where hypocrites must wear cloaks that are metal, and they're beautiful and shining on the outside, but they are dull gray and heavy on the inside. Beautiful outside, ugly inside. And that represents the sin of hypocrisy, that it sounds so good. It's beautiful and shiny. But at the heart of the matter, it's dirty and horrible and hateful, and it hurts people. So that's a little bit about how allegory is going to function in this text. So I'm going to sign off and I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Cox, and he's going to do the back page with you. Bye.